All right, today we're diving into a really powerful historical report. It outlines this stark, nearly 300-year history of conflict in Afghanistan. I mean, it traces a cycle of violence from the very founding of the state in 1747 right up to today. And let me tell you, its conclusions are, well, they're incredibly challenging. So let's get right into it. So the report we're looking at makes this incredibly bold and challenging argument right from the very beginning. It basically says that for almost 300 years, the main story of the Afghan state, it isn't just about random conflict. No, it's about one group's deliberate, systematic dominance over everyone else. And that's the cycle we're going to trace, using the evidence laid out right here in this document. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down following the 5 key eras the report identifies. First, we'll look at the foundations of this ethnic domination. Then, we'll get into a period the report literally calls the Great Catastrophe. After that, we'll see how all this got institutionalized, look at the recent republic that rose and fell, and finally, we'll see what the report says about maybe, just maybe, breaking the cycle. All right, let's jump into part 1, the foundations of domination. So our story kicks off way back in 1747 with the founding of the Durrani Empire. And what this report argues, and this is crucial, is that the very DNA of this new state was forged in military conquest, a conquest that right away set up a really clear ethnic hierarchy. And this timeline, well, it really lays out that initial pattern pretty clearly. According to the source, when Ahmad Shah Abdali started his military campaigns, they weren't just about grabbing more land. No, they were targeted. The report documents how cities like Nishapur and Mashhad, which were mostly non-Pashtun, were plundered. You see, this wasn't just war for the sake of war. The report claims it was a deliberate policy of land confiscation. And that laid the groundwork for everything to come. The report actually gives this core strategy a name: Pashtunization, and it really hammers this point home. This was not random. It was a deliberate state policy. The idea was to move Pashtun tribes into the really fertile northern lands, and in the process, systematically push out the people who already lived there, the Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks. And what was the goal? Well, according to this analysis, it was to permanently change the demographic map of the country, all to lock down control. Okay, this brings us to what the report calls the single most brutal chapter in this entire history. They call it the Great Catastrophe. This is the reign of Abdur-Rahman Khan. And his rule, which was backed by the British, is presented as the exact moment when all these foundational policies just exploded into a systematic and truly devastating campaign of violence. In this quote, man, it gets right to the heart of how this was all justified. You see, the report points to Abdur-Rahman's official goal, creating a unified nation. But it argues that this so-called unity was just a code word for a campaign of violent, forced assimilation. That whole slogan about a strong central government, according to this analysis, it was just a cover for wiping out any identity that wasn't the dominant one. If you want to understand the sheer scale of what the report calls a genocide, you have to let this number sink in: 62%. The source cites the court historian from that very time and claims that in just a couple of years, over 62% of the entire Hazara population was either massacred, sold into slavery, or forced to flee. It is an absolutely staggering figure. It really underscores the brutality of this campaign. So how is this actually carried out? The report details a whole strategy with multiple parts. First, a religious decree, a fatwa, was issued that basically declared Shia Hazaras to be infidels. This gave a green light for a holy war against them. Then, a scorched earth policy was used on their lands. Thousands of their people were openly sold into slavery right in the markets of Kabul and Kandahar. And entire regions like Kafiristan were invaded, the people were forcibly converted, and the area was even renamed Nuristan, the Land of Light, in an effort to completely erase its past. So after the sheer, unbelievable violence of Abdur-Rahman's reign, what happens in the 20th century? Well, according to the source, these policies didn't go away. They just became embedded, institutionalized, part of the state itself. The methods changed, though. They shifted from outright massacre to more subtle cultural suppression, and then, eventually, right back to all-out war. And this table from the report does a great job of breaking down that evolution. You can see here, during the monarchy, the main method was cultural and linguistic suppression, officially promoting the Pashto language over Persian, even changing old geographic names. Then, fast forward to the Soviet War, and the report points to a brutal military scorched earth policy, specifically targeting farms and irrigation in the northern areas where resistance was strong. And it all leads up to the first Taliban rule, which the source says combined both ethnic massacres, like the one in Mazar-e-Sharif, with something new and terrible: gender apartheid. And that brings us to the modern era, to the last couple of decades. The source argues that after 2001, there was this immense hope for a new democratic Afghanistan. But that hope was ultimately destroyed by the very same old patterns of ethnic politics. And that failure, it claims, is what paved the way for the Taliban to come back. So, how did this whole democratic project fall apart? Well, the report points a finger directly at systemic, organized election fraud. I mean, look at this. It cites over 1 million fraudulent votes in the 2009 election. 1 million. Then, the 2014 election was so chaotic, it almost led to a civil war, and the U.S. had to step in and broker this awkward national unity government. And what was the end result of all this? According to the report, it was the complete and total destruction of the public's faith in democracy. And the consequences of that failure, wow, they are laid bare right here. The report draws such a stark before and after picture. During the Republic era, you'd see bilingual signs everywhere. But after August 2021, the source describes a systematic campaign to literally erase the Persian language from public signs. And even more dramatically, the rights of women and girls, rights they had gained to education, to work, to public life, they weren't just rolled back, they were utterly and completely reversed. The report uses a really strong term for this: gender apartheid. And it's important to note that's terminology also used by the United Nations. Think about this. Afghanistan is now the only country on the planet that bans girls from getting an education past the 6th grade. Women are blocked from most jobs, from going to parks or gyms. They can't even travel far without a male guardian. And the Ministry of Women's Affairs? It was literally abolished and replaced by the Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. The source is very clear on this point. The UN has called this a crime against humanity. Okay, so after documenting this incredibly long and painful history, where does that leave us? What does the report say now? Well, it wraps up by analyzing what it sees as the root causes of the crisis. And importantly, it tries to outline a possible path forward. And this is a really crucial point the report makes. This has never been just an internal problem. It identifies this consistent pattern of foreign powers making a bad situation worse, usually for their own strategic benefit. You can see it right here: 19th century Britain backing rulers like Abdur Rahman to create a buffer state, the Soviet Union's invasion and its brutal tactics, Pakistan's decades of support for the Taliban, and yes, even the US and the West supporting corrupt governments and flawed elections. So what's the solution? Does the report offer one? Well, it concludes by laying out these 6 core principles that it sees as completely non-negotiable for any kind of stable future. It starts with historical justice, actually acknowledging the crimes of the past. Then, real equality for everyone. Pluralism, accepting diversity as a strength. A participatory democracy where all groups share power. The rule of law to end the culture of impunity. And, of course, the full recognition of women's rights. The report's final warning is pretty stark. Without all of these, the cycle of violence is just doomed to repeat itself. And so, we're left with the report's final central question. After looking at nearly 300 years of a history that seems built on exclusion and violence, it leaves us with this profound challenge to think about. What does it actually take to dismantle a foundation like that? And how do you build something new, something based on justice and inclusion, in its place?